The drone footage was unmistakably clear. Thick brown sludge flowing into the lake, just beyond the no trespassing sign that I had installed myself. Emily, the HOA president, was standing next to a backhoe as if she were revealing a new landmark. Cut to me on the opposite side of the lake, phone in one hand and binoculars in the other, already calling my attorney. Yes, that is me. You might be wondering how things reached this point where the HOA is contaminating their own water supply with sewage and trying to sue me over it. It all began with the smell. Not the usual earthy, fishy aroma I had grown accustomed to after a decade of living by the water. No, this scent was sharper and sour, almost like someone left dirty diapers in the sun and tried to mask it with air freshener. I first noticed it on a Tuesday morning while enjoying my regular coffee on the deck, watching the ducks create slow ripples across the lake. The water looked darker than usual, greasy in a way that reminded me of motor oil floating on a puddle after rain. I thought perhaps someone upstream had accidentally dumped something, maybe from the construction area a mile north. But by Thursday the ducks had disappeared, and the algae, which normally appeared in late July, had suddenly exploded. Entire sheets of it, greenish-gray and stringy, spread across the surface like moss-covered pancakes. I am not a scientist, but I could tell something was wrong. And I am not the type to sit back and wait for someone else to ask the tough questions. I took my kayak, a cooler filled with ice, and several mason jars, spending most of that Saturday paddling around like some rural environmental agent, collecting water samples and placing them near my Kiowar's light. The odor grew stronger as I approached the southeast cove behind the maintenance shed close to the HOA's storm drainage outlet. That's when I spotted it. A plastic pipe, as large as a fire hose, partially hidden in cattails, dripping brown liquid directly into the lake. No signs, no filters, just a crude hose discharging who knows what into the waters where I used to swim every summer. I took pictures, then recorded video, and finally contacted the county. The woman at Environmental Services said she would open a case, but her indifferent tone made it clear she wasn't losing any sleep over this. I wasn't shocked. Around here, the HOA holds more power than the mayor. And Emily, our board president, treats it like her personal domain. You either flatter her or face banishment. I chose to avoid both and bring the evidence straight to the source. On Monday afternoon, I entered the HOA office carrying a manila folder under one arm and 3 jars of water in the other. Emily sat behind her desk like a dethroned queen, wearing a crisp linen blouse, pearl earrings, and a tight smile that showed she had already made up her mind about me. "David," she said, folding her hands as if preparing to pitch a financial advice seminar. "I assume you are here about the algae," I said, opening the folder and pushing a glossy photo across her desk. It showed a close-up of the hose. "That is not algae, Emily. That is untreated sewage coming from behind your maintenance shed." She did not even flinch. "Do you have any evidence that it is sewage?" I placed one of the mason jars on the desk. "How about you smell this and tell me what you think?" Instead of responding, she slid the photo back as if she were a blackjack dealer folding a losing hand. "David, your property borders the lake. How can we be sure the pollution is not coming from your septic system?" I blinked. "Because I have not had a working septic tank since the 1990s. The neighborhood switched to a shared system 20 years ago. Remember that major infrastructure project you supported?" She responded crisply, tapping her pen on the desk. "According to our latest inspection, there is standing water near your outbuilding, which could be runoff or possibly illegal graywater discharge." That was when I realized the meeting was not a discussion, but a trap. She already had a violation notice printed and sitting in a folder behind her. She pushed it across the desk like a present. I opened it. $1,200 fine for hazardous runoff, lake contamination, and property mismanagement. payable within 30 days or face increasing penalties. I laughed uncontrollably. "You are fining me for the sewage you are dumping into my lake." "It is not your lake," she said with a smug and matter-of-fact tone. "It belongs to the HOA. Community-governed and community-controlled. That was the key point." I stood up, took the violation notice, and folded it carefully in half. "You just made a serious error, Emily," I said, slipping it into my back pocket. "A major one." She grinned once more, all sharpness and boldness. "See you at the upcoming board meeting." The news traveled quicker than I had imagined. By Friday, neighbors who used to greet me stopped even looking my way. My Amazon deliveries began arriving battered. The Community Bulletin published a pointed editorial about careless lakefront property owners and the urgent need for tougher environmental responsibility. Someone even left a bag of dog waste in my mailbox twice. I had lived here long enough to recognize these as clear threats. Emily had declared a conflict and was now rewriting the rules like a corrupt lawman in an old Western. But here is the part she was unaware of. The part practically no one knew, not even most members of the board. 3 decades ago, my grandfather installed the well that provides water for the entire homeowners association. At that time, before half the neighborhood existed, it was merely an empty lot with a single cabin and a retired hydrologist dreaming of an off-grid lifestyle. That hydrologist was my grandfather. He was not only unconventional but also incredibly precise. When development began in the early 2000s, he entered into a private agreement with the builders, permitting them to connect to his well in return for monthly upkeep fees and a clause securing ownership of the water source. I remained the owner, along with my descendants or anyone I chose to transfer it to. After his passing, I became the heir to both the property and the well. The HOA had completely forgotten about the underground pipes. The monthly check they sent was automatically deposited into my LLC account. However, I never terminated the contract, nor did I grant them any rights. For the next week, I rummaged through my grandfather's old filing cabinets, those heavy steel ones that weigh more than a minivan. There, I found the original water rights agreement, properly signed, notarized, and filed next to a county-certified map showing the water distribution lines. I compared it with the HOA's public infrastructure documents. Sure enough, the entire neighborhood, including the clubhouse, pool, park sprinklers, and every home faucet, depended on water drawn from my well. I was no longer just a homeowner. I was their landlord, their provider, their lifeline. Emily believed she could force me into submission, but she had no clue that whenever she flushed the HOA office toilet, she was using my water. Now that she tried to accuse me of pollution while dumping raw sewage into a communal lake, I had a few plans in mind, starting with the upcoming HOA meeting. First, though, I needed to adjust some valves. Let's just say things were about to get very dry. The contract was so ancient it still listed fax numbers, not emails or QR codes, a real-time capsule. Legal, airtight language was printed on paper yellowed with age that had not seen sunlight for at least 10 years. I sat cross-legged on the floor of my tool shed, surrounded by folders and rolled blueprints, the scent of aged wood and mildew filling the air, with my grandfather's name beautifully inked in fountain pen on every page. The document was titled Water Access and Supply License Agreement, dated April 19th, 1989, notarized by someone named Edna with a floral stamp, and it made one thing abundantly clear. The well and the water it produced were private property belonging to us. The developer at the time, a man named Hank Durbin, had agreed to shared access on the condition that ownership of the well stayed with my family, and the homeowners association would pay a modest monthly fee to continue using it. But here is the crucial part. The contract contained no end date no clause for renewal, and no provision giving the homeowners association any easement rights beyond passive use. My great-uncle, God rest his cautious soul, had hidden these rights so deeply within the fine print you might think he had been burned before in a past life by an HOA president. I laughed aloud, sitting there on the dirt, because while Emily and her clipboard-wielding enforcers were busy citing me for fabricated runoff violations, they were literally sustaining their entire operation with the water I had inherited. That laughter was short-lived, because then I remembered the sludge, the pipe, the lake. If they were this careless about what they dumped into the water, the environment was one thing, but what else were they introducing into the system? My system. So I reached out to an old acquaintance from a brief period working at a water quality consulting firm, a guy named Doug, who owed me a favor after I saved him from a particularly troublesome situation involving an excavator and a bottle of Jack. "Daniels, how quickly can you get here?" I asked. "To run a comprehensive test including lead, copper, coliform bacteria, the whole set." "I can arrive tomorrow," he replied, "but if I discover something, will you make it public?" "No," I said. "Not yet. I plan to keep it quiet." He arrived with his equipment, looking exactly like someone who owns half a dozen flannel shirts and a freezer stocked with venison. We tested 4 water lines, 1 directly from the well, 1 from my faucet, and 2 from random hydrants across the homeowners association properties. The results were far worse than I anticipated. Thankfully, my line was clean. However, the hydrants showed alarming levels of fecal coliforms, phosphates, and chemical substances I could barely pronounce without gagging. Emily and her team were not only polluting the lake, but they were also pushing sewage back into the water supply meant for drinking. This meant they were harming the environment, breaking health regulations, violating contracts, and best of all, giving me every legal justification to cut off their access immediately. And that is exactly what I did. No press announcement, no HOA notification, just a simple turn of a valve in the concrete pit behind my garage. I shut off the flow, secured the valve, and locked the well hatch with a chain to keep it closed permanently. After that, I went inside, prepared some popcorn, and watched the fallout happen like a slow-motion fireworks display. It began with a flood of phone calls, dozens of them. Then came an urgent email notification about a temporary water outage due to maintenance. By the following morning, water pressure had dropped throughout the entire neighborhood. Emily's beloved fountain at the HOA clubhouse stopped flowing. Sprinklers failed to turn on, toilets flushed with a defeated gurgle. Next arrived the bottled water trucks, lined up one after another like soldiers at a siege, funded by the HOA's emergency fund, which I knew was already depleted from the last landscaping disaster. Residents began asking questions, not only about the outage, but also why there was no backup water source, why nobody had been notified about the shutdown, and why they were paying $900 a month in fees, yet still had to carry bottled water like they were in a crisis. Emily panicked. It was palpable in the air. Fear and desperation mixed with whatever scent she sprayed on her hair every morning. She called a special board meeting at the community center, covered with HOA members-only signs as if it were a classified gathering. Naturally, I wasn't invited, but I did not need to be. Halfway through the meeting, a neighbor named Paul texted me a picture of the agenda. Item 3 concerns the discussion about legal measures against the well operator. I almost spilled my beer when I heard about legal action being taken against me for shutting off my own water supply after they contaminated it. I prepared myself for the worst. The following morning, a certified letter arrived by courier, featuring the HOA's official letterhead and an imposing serif font that seemed overly eager to appear authoritative. They accused me of intentionally sabotaging vital infrastructure, knowingly putting residents at risk, and violating public trust. They demanded that I restore water flow immediately, agree to third-party inspections, and accept a new operating agreement drafted exclusively by their lawyers, all without any compensation. I read the letter once, then again, and then laughed so hard I almost choked on my sandwich. These people were clueless. You cannot sue someone for refusing to provide something they legally own, especially after they broke the usage rules through toxic backflow and unlawful dumping. They treated this as a petty quarrel, but I had years of records, test results, and most importantly, a contract so strong it could have been laminated in Kevlar. I called my lawyer, an old family friend named Luann, who had gained a reputation for relentlessly fighting HOAs over land rights. I told her, "I'm going to fax you something, and then I want you to overwhelm them with paperwork." She responded, "That's exactly what I live for." The cease and desist was delivered to Emily. At the desk, 48 hours later, I received a certified complaint regarding environmental wrongdoing, an official termination of access to the water supply according to Section 8.4 of the original contract, and a notarized bill covering expenses for contamination testing, repairs, and legal costs. The total amount was $1,147,805.62, payable within 30 days. Emily blinked, and for once in her carefully prepared life, she found herself without a script, but she refused to stay silent. A week later, I was formally served. This time, they were suing me in court, seeking compensation for damages, loss of community privileges, and, believe it or not, emotional distress. They accused me of cutting off the water supply as retaliation for unrelated conflicts. Their lawyer, a smug corporate representative dressed in an expensive $300 tie, arrived at the first hearing carrying a binder thicker than a Bible and attempted to portray me as an unstable hermit obsessed with opposing authority. "David," he said with the kind of condescension reserved for people who think perfectly manicured lawns are a moral duty, "do you consider yourself above the community's rules?" I answered, "No, but I do believe I am above the sewage line." The courtroom murmured with amusement, and the judge raised an eyebrow. Then I presented my file, including water test results, drone images of the dumping, contract excerpts, and a notarized declaration from Doug detailing the contamination levels. The judge reviewed it slowly, then looked at the HOA's lawyer and uttered what might be the 7 most delightful words in the English language. "Why did you not mention any of this?" The trial did not even last a full week. The HOA's argument fell apart like soggy drywall. Emily attempted to deflect responsibility onto her maintenance crew. The maintenance worker claimed he was simply following orders. By the conclusion, the judge ruled in my favor, declared the HOA in breach of contract, awarded me compensation for property damage and emotional distress, and issued a court mandate barring any further use of my well without a fully renegotiated agreement, one that was written on my conditions. Water delivery trucks became a constant presence. The community swimming pool remained empty until further notice. Emily's newsletters shifted from arrogant to frantic before vanishing entirely. I did not utter a single word. It was unnecessary. Instead, I installed a new sign beside the wellhead with bold blue lettering reading, "Private Supply." Trespassers will be prosecuted. Below, in smaller print, I added, "Hydration is a privilege, not a right." On a Monday morning, right after cooking eggs and scrolling through the latest HOA email blast, ironically calling for community solidarity during tough times, I filed a counter lawsuit. The eggs were still warm when I sent a 47-page lawsuit packet, neatly bound and personally delivered to their lawyer's office by Lan herself because she found it fitting. The countersuit named not only the HOA, but also Emily personally, along with 3 board members and their contracted maintenance supervisor. The accusations included environmental negligence and deliberate wrongdoing. Contamination of a communal water supply, retaliatory enforcement of HOA rules, and breaches of easement agreements. Oh, and for good measure, character defamation. We threw the entire legal arsenal at them and even added some unique elements. I knew they would fight ruthlessly. Emily never backs down from a conflict. She transforms it into a brunch gathering and invites every board member's spouse within a 2-mile radius. But she didn't realize that while she was using HOA newsletters and group chats as weapons, I was gathering an arsenal of proof. I had it all: laboratory-certified water analyses, aerial drone footage revealing the brown liquid flowing from behind the HOA's maintenance shed into the lake, timestamps, invoices, and sworn affidavits from 2 former maintenance workers who both quit due to unethical waste disposal methods. One of them even left a handwritten message saying this mess will not stay hidden forever. Literally, I suppose he was right. We filed the case in county court, and the hearing was scheduled within 2 days. Emily's attorney attempted to postpone it, citing ongoing mediation, but the judge refused, especially after seeing the county water board complaint I submitted as evidence. Apparently, I wasn't the only person who noticed the brown substance in the clear water. The whole neighborhood exploded. Once the lawsuit was officially recorded, it became public knowledge. And once it was public, it turned into gossip. Classic juicy HOA drama at a criminal syndicate level. Suddenly, the very same neighbors who had been avoiding me as if I had a contagious disease started appearing on my porch, bearing Costco muffins and uneasy smiles. One of them even returned an old binder filled with board meeting minutes from 2014 to 2018. She had forgotten to hand it back after briefly serving as the HOA secretary. Inside, there were detailed notes from several meetings in which Emily and 2 other board members discussed ways to reduce costs for waste treatment and considered alternatives to city disposal fees. Their proposed solution was to redirect stormwater runoff to low-flow retention zones, in other words, my lake. However, the true turning point, the key piece that transformed the case from strong to absolutely rock-solid, came from someone I had not contacted in more than a year. His name was Barry Colson, a bald, ruddy-faced former county infrastructure coordinator with a bad knee and a grudge as massive as heavy machinery. Years ago, I had helped Barry when a crooked developer tried to encroach on his property line. I gave him a land use map he wasn't aware existed without expecting anything in return. Apparently, Barry had not forgotten because he called me the week before the trial and asked, "Are you still battling that HOA?" "Yes," I answered, more determined than ever. "Do you have a moment to discuss drainage?" The very next morning, Barry arrived at my house carrying a USB drive and a manila envelope packed with confidential documents. Among them was a report from 2019 that revealed the installation of unauthorized diversion pipes along maintenance parcel 3B, which, it turned out, the hose I discovered behind their shed was connected directly to the source. In other words, they weren't simply dumping sewage. They had designed a system to disguise it as runoff, effectively evading the city's wastewater inspections. David even possessed satellite photos revealing the installation crews working covertly, labeled under irrigation tasks. The trial began on a Wednesday morning. The courtroom was packed so tightly you might have thought free property was being handed out. Emily sat in the front row, dressed somberly like a funeral director, flanked by 3 sharply dressed attorneys who looked like they were built for battle. Her face was so tense I feared it might break. I remained quiet at my own table next to Luan, who was sipping from a mug that read, "My lawyer can beat up your lawyer." The first day was all about posturing. Emily's team claimed the water problems were just standard maintenance issues and accused me of acting in bad faith to undermine the neighborhood's stability. Their expert witness, a condescending hydrologist whose experience seemed limited to college textbooks, insisted that minor nutrient inflows could have caused the lake's algae bloom rather than sewage. Luan allowed him to finish before presenting a photo from my drone showing a brown fluid streaming from a pipe marked OA maintenance only. The expert faltered, stared at his shoes, and asked for a break. By the third day, public sentiment was shifting. Reporters arrived and someone started live tweeting the hearing. The HOA's legal team tried to keep control, but the tide was turning. They tried to overwhelm us with endless procedural challenges, but Luan cut through them effortlessly, as a combine harvesting corn. When Emily took the stand, she portrayed herself as the victim, claiming that I had misused my position of trust by restricting access to water for the community. "Were you aware," Luan asked, "that the well your community depends on was never officially transferred to the HOA's ownership?" Emily hesitated, saying she believed it was public infrastructure. Luan responded bluntly, "Belief does not equal ownership. Did you verify the deed?" Emily replied that their lawyer had investigated it but lacked written proof. Silence filled the courtroom. The real shock came when Barry testified. He spoke plainly, exposing how they had illegally installed pipes to dump waste in unauthorized places, failed to inform the county, and hoped their actions would go unnoticed. I noticed, and now everyone else did too. The jury remained motionless. Emily's lawyer attempted to object, but the judge dismissed it swiftly, leaving an impression of finality. The verdict arrived sooner than anyone had anticipated. The court ruled the HOA guilty of violating environmental safety laws, breaking their usage contract, and defaming me in official documents. Emily was personally fined for gross misconduct and negligence. The board was ordered to pay more than $300,000 in damages and legal fees, and the court issued a temporary ban on all HOA operations until a new election could take place. You would think that was the end of it, but it was not. Everyone expected Emily to slip away unnoticed, tail between her legs, but no, she went all out with a public relations disaster. 2 days following the court's decision, a local news crew appeared outside the community center to speak with worried residents about the water issue. Emily unexpectedly took over the live broadcast without any invitation and delivered what might be the most bizarre interview I have ever witnessed. She began by accusing the court of bias, then shifted blame to poor soil drainage for the waste leakage, and then, brace yourself, she actually confessed that they temporarily redirected overflow through the retention system to cut down on unnecessary costs. The reporter was stunned. "Are you saying the Homeowners Association deliberately diverted sewage?" Emily hesitated, realizing what she had just admitted, then quickly attempted to rephrase it. "Not sewage, just gray water, reclaimed water, untreated. It was natural runoff mixed with operational backflow." "So, raw sewage, then?" That definition is debatable. The interview aired live twice before going viral. Emily had openly admitted that the HOA dumped wastewater to save money. That became the headline. The thumbnail showed her with her mouth half open and eyes wide, like a raccoon caught in the headlights. The comments section exploded with outrage. Within 7 days, Emily stepped down. The rest of the board followed suit. The HOA's bank account was frozen pending an audit, and community meetings quickly turned into public rebellions. And me? I stayed silent, just observing everything unfold from my back porch with a glass of bourbon, and enjoying the most satisfying quiet I had ever experienced. No more trucks, no more false violations, just the peaceful sound of my lake beginning to heal and my phone lighting up with messages from neighbors who once mocked me, now asking if I would consider running for HOA president. I chose not to respond. I had far greater plans, ones Emily would have despised. But first, there was one final task. I carved a new sign, nailed it firmly to the old maintenance shed, and painted the letters bold and red. "Do not dump. We are watching." Beneath that, in smaller letters, P.S. "We own the water." Everything unfolded in a single afternoon. It began with a heavy, still air, the kind of silence that fills the space before something monumental happens. The courtroom was packed tighter than a feed store on delivery day, every folding chair occupied by a resident holding their breath. They had been witnessing this disaster unravel for weeks, much like watching a train wreck from a distance, unable to look away, secretly grateful it was not their own catastrophe. But today, the wreck belonged to Emily. The judge's voice was steady as he read the verdict, but every word hit with the force of thunder. The HOA was declared responsible for environmental violations, breach of contract, defamation, and negligence. The board was mandated to pay me $3,670 in damages plus $80,000 in legal fees and undergo a full audit by an independent state investigator. Yet the part that truly made my day was the court's decision concerning the well-in. The ownership in perpetuity belonged to me alone, along with exclusive authority over all access, upkeep, and distribution. This meant that not a single drop of water could be taken, no flush, faucet, or garden hose, without my written approval. The room fell so silent you could have heard a pin drop as the gavel struck. I did not smile, not yet. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and allowed the gravity of the situation to sink in. Emily was there, of course, tucked away in the corner next to her newest legal team, her eyes wide open and her hands gripping so tightly, her French manicure looked as if it might break. She remained silent. Not when the judge stripped her of all authority, not when the court clerk began listing the environmental agency's pending charges, and not when an officer in uniform handed her a subpoena on live television. Fraud, unlawful dumping, falsification of maintenance records. The list went on and on like the credits of a terribly bad movie. The woman who had once fined me for uneven hedge trimming was now staring down a criminal trial for contaminating a public water supply with waste. How ironic, right? The news went viral. Local, regional, even national outlets picked up the story. A president who once dumped sewage was now herself being dumped. My favorite headline was from a local satire page. Emily fined $300 for finding the guy who owned the water. It even made the 6 o'clock news. The anchor read the verdict while sipping bottled water and doing their best not to grin. Within 7 days, Emily's house had a for sale sign on the lawn and a state seal sticker on the front door. Below the surface, everything had changed. Investigation, do not enter, nobody, waved farewell. No one brought pastries. Just a sequence of municipal vehicles, a hazmat team, an inspection, and a U-Haul driven by what appeared to be her last remaining cousin, burning rubber out of Willow Ridge quicker than a runaway teenager. The rest of the board resigned in fear. Some claimed ignorance about what was happening. One man, Jim, I think that was his name, said he only joined for the complimentary donuts. It made no difference. Their names were on the documents, and the documents did not care about donuts. A special election was held to replace the board. For the first time in 10 years, every position was open. I did not run. I did not have to. The people who previously sneered at me on the street now nodded as I passed. Some even dropped off pie. One neighbor, who had once yelled at me for spraying his tulips with my garden hose, personally delivered an apology note and a six-pack. It is amazing how fast power shifts when the truth comes to light. At the first community meeting with the new board, the atmosphere was different. No arrogance, no lectures about mailbox placement or patriotic decorations rules. Just people aiming to fix the damage, restore what was broken, and figure out how to coexist without someone threatening to garnish their wages over a lawn. No, they asked me to say a few words at the meeting. I kept it brief. I said, "When you find the person who controls the..." If you want water, you better hope he feels generous. Everyone gave a standing ovation. I only made one change to the water agreement. It was not a price increase or a limit on use, just a straightforward rule. Any effort to undermine or bypass the rights of the well owner would lead to services being stopped immediately. They called it the Emily Clause. Everyone agreed to it without opposition. I never charged anyone for water and never intended to. My goal was simply to remind them whose supply they were tapping into. As a final gesture, I mounted a new plaque beside the lake, large and bronze, secured onto a stone base. I carved it myself. It took me 2 days and caused a terrible backache, but it was worth every moment. The message said, "This is what happens when you find the person controlling your faucet." Below that, I added another line honoring clear water, common sense, and the final HOA president of Willow Ridge. By autumn, the lake was clear again, fish returned, and the algae bloom faded away. For reassurance, I had David perform another water test. He sent me the results with a simple note. "Cleaner than bottled water. You should market this." I chuckled and replied, "No, it stays free, just never forgotten." That winter, I poured a fresh concrete slab near the old maintenance shed where the illegal pipe once discharged like a cursed sewage chute. I sealed off the pipe, closed the connection, and attached a heavy iron sign reading, "No dumping ever." Underneath, the sign reminded, "This is what we drink, remember?" By springtime, tourists began snapping pictures. A few students from the nearby college even requested permission to conduct a case study on grassroots environmental justice. I explained to them that it was not really grassroots. It was more like traditional revenge, rural style, mixed with a bit of legal paperwork and a generous amount of patience. Life eventually calmed down. The rumors faded. The lawn regrew in the spot where Emily used to walk her dog, just far enough onto my property to make a point. She is probably doing the same thing now in some unfortunate subdivision in Arizona, trying to convince someone that their flower boxes violate community standards. But here in Willow Ridge, we marked 1 year since the trial by hosting a lakeside barbecue, complete with free drinks and live music. The whole experience. Families brought their children, dogs, and even a few paddle boards. We grilled burgers, raised a toast to clean water, and celebrated the newly restored community dock with sparkling cider and a plaque that simply read, "The water's fine." I sat at the edge of the dock as the sun lowered, casting a golden glow across the water that now sparkled clear from one bank to the other. My boots were off, my dog beside me, and a warm mug of coffee in my hand. No meetings, no violations, only the gentle rustle of the breeze through the cattails and the soft splash of water against the shore. That was when I noticed the sign, my favorite one, still standing proudly on the hill above the pump house, its bolt heads shining, gleaming in the warm amber glow. Private property. Unauthorized entry will be prosecuted. The faucet remained under my control, and the tranquility was still mine to keep.